We're up here on top of Mount Marcy, just waiting for the sun to rise. Day 2 of the Northville Blasted Trail is in the books. Well, life doesn't get much better than this open ridge walk on Jay Mountain, and we're at the summit of Lower Wolfjaw, our 8th high peak of the day here on the Great Range Traverse. Well, it's 4:30 a.m., heading a big slide today, and it's -4 degrees here at the parking lot. Bushwhacking our way up Green Mountain, and I have to say, the trees are winning this fight today. Well, the sun is shining and the wind is whipping here up on Haystack. Next stop, Saddleback Cliffs. Cock-a-doodle-doo from the summit of Roostercombe. Scarface might be the most underrated hike in the entire park. 60-mile-an-hour winds up on Hurricane. Very fitting, cruising up the Bald Rock slab here on Bald Mountain. Standing up here on the summit of Catamount Mountain, Iroquois, Mount Van Hovenberg, Skylight, Santanoni. You're listening to the 46 of 46 podcast. Hello everyone, I hope you all had a Merry Christmas and you're enjoying this nice time of year. This week after Christmas always kind of feels like every day is Sunday, at least it does in my world. But I am back this year for a New Year's session recap of the previous year here on the 46 of 46 podcast. I've done this the last couple of years on New Year's Eve, and I'm releasing another episode again, basically to showcase all of the different episodes that I put out this year. And if you're new to the podcast, maybe there's an episode or two that you haven't listened to that you'll say, oh, that sounds like an episode I would like to listen to. Let me go check that out. So I like to do a little recap, just go back through the year, give some background, behind the scenes type of information on the different episodes. And I appreciate all of you so much listening to this podcast. I am almost at 4 years of doing this podcast, and there's many of you who have been with me from the start. So I appreciate that, and it's pretty wild to see that this show is still going. Here we go, into almost into year 4. Come March, it will be year 4. I believe I started the show in 2019, although I started writing the first season in the fall of 2018. So actually, I'm over the hump in terms of 4 years, but 4 years coming this March. So thank you all so much who have been here the whole time. And if this is your very first episode, sorry, this is maybe a weird episode to start with, but hey, maybe not, because I'm going through a whole bunch of different podcast episodes. So anyways, let's send it back right now on the New Year's sessions to January. It feels like it was just years ago, but only 1 year ago. So the first episodes of this year, the Summit Sessions number 31, was a 2-part story. The new 46 unsupported FKT with Matt Mochella. Now, this episode was originally just going to be one episode, but his story was just so good, and we just had a great conversation chatting, and me hearing the story of him setting the unsupported FKT, also known as the fastest known time, of the 46 high peaks in the summer, so last summer of 2021. And I actually don't know, I have no idea, to be honest with you, if people attempted to break that record again this past summer in 2022. I have no idea. But anyways, that episode was a 2-part Summit Sessions where Matt took us through start to finish as he set the new unsupported FKT of the 46 high peaks in just under 5 days, which broke the previous record by more than 24 hours, which in FKT terms is pretty significant. So if you're into that whole FKT thing, I've done a lot of episodes like that here on the podcast. You'll definitely want to check those out, those 2 episodes out. That's episode 104 and episode 105. Moving on, the most hated person in the Adirondack Park by some and the most beloved by others. Summit Session number 32, Winter High Peaks Redlining, Backcountry Skiing, and Winter Camping with none other than Mr. Jonathan Zaharik. Jonathan's going to come on the podcast again soon, and we're going to chat all things winter hiking and just kind of catch up, because those episodes tend to be fan favorites when Jonathan stops by, so that will be fun. But yeah, that episode was just catching up with John, see what he's been up to. He's always out in the woods doing something new, and Jonathan's always exploring and doing new things in the woods, which is what I appreciate. And he got into backcountry skiing last winter, and he was working on and completed his winter redlining mission, which is to hike every trail in the High Peaks Wilderness. So congrats to John for accomplishing that, because it's definitely, it's like a new way to experience the same land that you see all the time. Like, you could hike the same mountains over and over again, and it's still great. It's always a different experience. Or you could go explore different trails, even though they might not go to the top of a mountain, but they'll go here or they'll go there. And you'll just see different parts of the park, different areas. And sometimes redlining is a really good, we like to hike lists, right? Here in the Adirondacks, that's kind of what we tend to do. So having something like the desire to redline, to hit every trail, gives you a list, sort of speak. Not really a list, but kind of a list of things to do, places to go, and reasons to go there. So he accomplished that great feat. So that's what we talk about in that episode, along with some winter camping that he had been doing, and just backcountry skiing, and just an overall, just kind of two dudes hanging out with some microphones, talking about the ADK. And that's what we're here to do, right? So that was episode 106, Summit Sessions number 32 with Jonathan Zaharik. Moving on, there was a little bit of a break in episodes due to me being out of the ADK and gone for work for a while. But episode 107, Summit Sessions number 33, High Peaks Healing with Billy Rudd. This was a really good episode, and this was Billy's story of his single season Winter 46, which basically became, him going after this goal was his way of healing post-divorce. It was all very fresh and recent to him, and that was his way of, therapy, mountain therapy. Can't blame him. We've all experienced it in one way or another. So that's what that episode is about. So it's a great single season Winter 46 story, but it's also just a great story of somebody experiencing healing in the mountains, and I think that there's a lot to be said about that. Moving on, episode 108, Summit Sessions number 34 with Doug Haney and his organization Bike ADK. So this was actually a really great episode. Doug stopped by the studio. He's local, so that was awesome. We didn't have to chat on the phone. But yeah, there's so much to do here in the ADK. There's just so much to do at all times outdoors, so it was awesome. And I had been wanting to do a mountain biking specific episode, and I still want to do more, bike specific episodes, but Doug's organization, they do so much in anything involving a bike. Sometimes it's mountain biking, sometimes it's road cycling. They do these different tours and all sorts of things. But basically, I was just showcasing another organization here in the ADK that does fantastic stuff. And if you want to hop on a bike and you want to see the Adirondacks on two wheels, that's a great episode to check out. Moving forward, episode 109, Adirondack Pioneers, my inaugural Adirondack Pioneers episodes about Orson Old Mountain Phelps. Now, I have a lot of desire to do more episodes like this. They are an undertaking, to say the least. These Adirondack Pioneers episodes, the more you look into Adirondack history, and I know so many people listening to the show really like history, and especially history here. This whole place is old, right? So why not learn about the dudes and dudettes that, helped turn this place into what it is here in the Adirondack Park. But that's a story about Orson Old Mountain Phelps. And I have more of these episodes in the works. It's funny because I've actually started writing numerous Adirondack Pioneers episodes, but they become one of those things where once I start writing, I realize, oh man, this is quite an undertaking. It's really hard to tell someone's story in just like an episode or, maybe a little series, but I do plan to do more of these Adirondack Pioneers episodes. This episode was met with great applause. Lots of people really liked it. I got a lot of messages about it. I would highly recommend checking it out if you like history and you just want to know, like, the people behind the whole vibe of this place here in the park and the culture and all that stuff. And I had been writing, this year, it will be done this year and it will come out, but I actually have written, it will probably be 3 or 4 episodes, but I have started writing an Adirondack Pioneers series about none other than my homeboy, Verplank Colvin. And that will come out this year. I just have to finish it, but again, that was the type of thing where I started writing and I just like, whoa, I have really bit off a lot here. But hey, it will get done and it will be out in 2023. because I'm already about 3/4 of the way through writing it, and it'll probably be a few episodes long. But yeah, Adirondack Pioneers, I hope to do more of those episodes. Sorry if you really liked it and were hoping for more, but there will be more as we move forward here. Now, speaking of history, moving on to episode 110, Summit Sessions number 35, Adirondack Settlers History with the author, the one, the only, Eric Schlimmer. So Eric Schlimmer just put out a gigantic book. It's a two-parter about the settling of all, I think 92 towns in the Adirondack Park. I think it's 92, but it's basically the history of how every single town came to be. Wow, what an undertaking. I know it's taken him years to write that book. And yeah, it's a two-part volume you can get from his website, transadk.com, Trans Adirondack Route. You can get that. You get those books there. And Beechwood Books, beechwoodbks.com. You can also purchase them there. But yeah, again, if you like history, you want to know, like, how did these towns become towns? You know, people settling here and deciding, like, okay, we're staying, let's start building. That will be for you. And in that episode, Eric, takes us through a little bit of it. Starting back in the 1700s, which is wild. Could you imagine being here in these woods in the 1700s? You think it's rugged now. Can't even imagine. But anyways, moving forward as we are into the month of May, Summit Sessions number 36, a 10-day canoeing and fishing Adirondack adventure with Jay Wachik. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, Jay. I apologize. But anyways, I guarantee you've been getting that since you were a kid. This was a fun story. Jay had just messaged me on Instagram telling me that he had just done this 10-day canoeing and fishing trip, and that he was thanking me for my podcast because it helped him pass a lot of time. And when I heard that he had just done a 10-day backcountry canoeing and fishing trip, I was like, that sounds exactly like the type of story I need to hear, and that I want to hear on the podcast. So he was gracious enough to come on, and it turns out Jay also has a YouTube channel, so that was cool. So he knows about being in the spotlight somewhat. Dax Woods Wanderer is his YouTube channel, so you check that out. But yeah, so we go through his whole trip, and it was a great story. And it's definitely one of my favorites from this past year. I mean, in the story, he got caught out there during a snowstorm, and had to, abandon fishing for a day and just get to the next lean-to. And then he had to wait out a huge snowstorm we had in the lean-to. It was actually a really great story. Totally like Adirondack adventure, and totally someone creating their own Adirondack adventure, which is what I'm all about. And it's a great story, and there might be some Bigfoot talk in that episode, so check it out. The Summit Sessions number 36, a 10-day canoeing and fishing 80K adventure with Jay Wachik. Moving on into the summer, so at this point, episodes slowed down. Once again, I was gone on a television series all summer, working the long, strenuous, terrible hours that is the Hollywood television factory. But we did have a week off of shooting in July, and that was when the Appleton Adirondack staycation took place. So this was a very fun episode for myself. I just went through my family's little staycation that we did. We were like, okay, I have a week off of work in the middle of the summer. What should we do? And I'm always like, I don't want to go anywhere in the summertime in the Adirondacks. Plus, I'm also gone often at work. So like, I'm home on the weekends, and so if I'm not working, I want to be here and be in the mountains. And the summer is the best time in the world in the Adirondacks, in my opinion. So it's like, this is where people come to vacation in the summer. Why would I want to go somewhere else? So we had a little Adirondack staycation, and we planned it. So each day we were going to a different part of the park, myself and my daughters and my wife. And we had just a blast. And we went to places that we've never been, explored different parts of the park that we've never been to. We had a day in Lake George. We had a day in Old Forge. We had a day in Malone, which I know is technically just outside the park, but it's northern 80K-ish, so it counts. Just going to do all these different things, and I told it like the story that it was, and it was a fun episode. We went to the the Adirondack Experience Museum in Blue Mountain Lake, which is unreal. So I can't recommend that enough. I really talk about it a bunch in the podcast, but the Adirondack Experience Museum, Blue Mountain Lake. You might be thinking like, oh, there's a museum in the Adirondacks. It's probably like quaint and small and like, cute. Nope. This thing is massive. It's huge. It's so well done. It is just, I was blown away by the quality and the size of, first off, the size of the campus itself is huge. There's so many buildings and like big, giant exhibits. It really felt like something you might see, in a major city, not in Blue Mountain Lake. So yeah, I really recommend it, especially if you're one of those people I was talking about who enjoys Adirondack history. Highly, highly recommend. And then we went to Old Forge and took the girls to Enchanted Forest, Water Safari, and obviously that was a good time. Summer in the Adirondacks. Oh, can't wait. But moving on, here we go. The Adirondack Hiking Challenges episode. Are they good or are they bad? So a lot of you who listen to this podcast, I know most of you are big hikers. That's what most of the people who listen to this show are into, and I love it. I'm a huge hiker, as you obviously all know. I also do lots of different stuff. But another thing that I run outside of this podcast is a hiking challenge itself. I run the Lake Placid Niner. It's kind of my baby. I created it and just, run it for the fun and the love of the game, even though it takes up an unbelievably large amount of time. It is purely a volunteer effort on my part, but I love it. And I love those 9 mountains and I love what it does. The Lake Placid Niner basically just showcases 9 smaller mountains here in the High Peaks region around Lake Placid that are a great stepping stone to the actual high peaks. So that is a huge reason that I put it together. But anyways, this episode, the Adirondack Hiking Challenges, are they good or are they bad? I just kind of riff, just me and the microphone, the same way I'm doing this episode, Solo Mission, about if they're good or if they're not, because there's been talks of disbanding the Saranac Lake Sixer Challenge because of a few annoyed homeowners around Baker Mountain in Saranac Lake who are upset with the amount of hikers parked around the lake. And I get it. If that's where your home is and there's just always tons of cars of hikers around, I can understand it being frustrating, but personally, I think disbanding these things is a bad idea. And I guess I shouldn't really spoil the episode if you haven't listened to it, but I think you probably would have assumed that I'm not against hiking challenges since I run one. But anyways, I go through kind of my thoughts on it because I thought I brought a unique perspective to it. There was like a newspaper article about, is it time to get rid of the Saranac Lake 6? And yeah, that's episode 113. Check it out. Moving on. Here we go. The return to Cliff and Redfield, my arch nemesis, Cliff Mountain. So this is only my second time ever climbing Cliff and Redfield. The only other time I have ever climbed those two was on my 46er journey when I did Marcy, Skylight, and Gray, and then I tacked on Cliff and Redfield at the end of the day on a whim, spontaneously, and it turned into a ridiculously massive and tiring and atrocious day by the end. But that's one of the most highest downloaded episodes on my podcast is the Marcy, Skylight, Gray, Cliff, and Redfield episode, and probably the episode I get the most amount of messages from people when they listen to it for the first time. But anyways, this was me going back to Cliff and Redfield fresh. And I know I haven't done a ton of these hiking trail episodes, these trip report episodes. They're a lot of work. They take a lot. They obviously, I have to hike the mountain first, but then I have to write the story and then edit and then record and edit them. And editing those, if you listen to it, you know that those tend to be pretty detailed in terms of the sound. So they're pretty time consuming. And a lot of times, honestly, I've done so many of these hiking trip report episodes that a lot of times when I'm out hiking, I just want to hike. I just want to go out in the woods and not worry about narrating storylines and talking about it and recording myself and like really having to make sure I take note of what do the woods look like around here. Okay, where is this river? How far into the trip was, okay, this river was 1.2 miles in. Okay, I got to remember this is 1.2 miles in. That sort of thing. Like it is quite the quite the amount of things to do while I'm out there. And so often when I'm hiking, especially in the summertime, since I only kind of come and go in the Adirondacks in the summer because I'm often on the road traveling and then home back here to Lake Placid for the weekends. A lot of times when I'm out hiking, I just want to go out and get in the woods. And a lot of times in the summer too, I don't get to do, or at least this past summer because I was gone so much, I don't get to do big high peaks days often. I end up going up like Mount Joe or Baxter or Van Hovenberg, those types of smaller mountains, way more than I do any sort of high peak, just because they're just easier. I can just quickly, I'm home for the weekend just for a short period of time. So I want to be home with my family, but I also want to go get in the woods for a bit. So I might just go run up one of those mountains. So I tend to spend a lot more time on those smaller mountains, especially ones I do all the time. So it's like I climb the same mountains a ton. Let's put it that way. But that's okay. Hey, that's how we get out. We get out and we enjoy the mountains, and every time you climb it, it's a different experience. You get a nice workout in. The views never disappoint, unless you're completely in a cloud, in which case it does. But if that's the case, then the trip up the mountain and down the mountain is the real story of the day. But anyway, so the return to Cliff and Redfield, that was a really long-winded answer why I haven't had a ton of trip report type of episodes lately, even though that's what started this whole podcast. But this was the return to Cliff and Redfield, and you'll have to take a listen to see if it changed my thought process on Cliff and Redfield. I will give you a spoiler. Not much. Not much changed this time around. But I'll get back there, although I'm hoping to get back there again this winter, because I actually do think that given the right days, the right conditions, that Cliff and Redfield both would be a great hike in the wintertime in particular, due to the mud factor, which is the worst part about Cliff, is gone. Although some of those cliffs will be, they're obviously going to be a challenge in the winter, but they also might not. I just feel like those two mountains actually will be a good winter hike. But anyways, they are far out there, and conditions must be in a decent spot for that. Moving on. Episode 115, Summit Sessions number 37. He finally came on the episode. Not really finally, but we finally were able to make it work out. But the ADK Fun Police, I had him come on the episode, and we talked all about the Adirondacks and why he started the Instagram page, the ADK Fun Police, how it's expanded and how it's just grown, and what his true mission really is, because while a lot of people might hate what he does, he actually comes from the absolute best place. And I fully support what he does, because I think he does it with tact, and I think he does it with heart. And I think he does it with, he's not attacking people the way you see on a lot of these pages that just want to kind of beat their chest and show how much more outdoorsy someone is than this other person, which is just completely stupid. He does it because it's like he takes the same thought process that I do, which is like, the mountains are more important than you. The mountains are more important than me. We need to treat them accordingly. And, and also he takes the approach of the mountains don't care about you, which that's kind of my whole vibe. You have to be ready. You have to prepare yourself, and it's up to you to do the homework necessary to do so, because they will put you in your place. And that, again, is a place you don't want to be put if you don't respect the mountains. So I love this dude. I love what he does. He may have some slightly different tactics than I do, but I think as time has gone, I think it's been a long time since I've seen anything he does that I don't, applaud or agree with. But I love what he does, and that was a fun episode. Great conversation. Check it out. Episode 115, Summit Sessions number 37, ADK Fun Police. Moving on, episode 116, Summit Sessions number 38, Canoeing the 90 Miler with Nick Hall, the Adirondack Canoe Classic, a.k.a. the 90 Miler. This was a really fun episode too. So this was Nick Hall's first time doing the 90 Miler. So that was an awesome perspective of, somebody pushing themselves and challenging themselves. And before this so the 90 Miler, I should have said, the 90 Miler is a basically 90-mile canoe race. It's a race, quote unquote, but it's more of just like, if you finish, you win, that sort of thing. Even though you can actually also get first place and actually win. But the point of it is to finish. But it's 3 days, basically 30 miles a day, slightly different, not quite, but typically 30 miles a day. And Nick before that had never canoed. I think it was more than like 12 or I want to say like 12 miles in a day. He had never, and only one day, not roughly 30 miles 3 days in a row. So he really had to push himself. He had to dig deep. There were times in those 3 days where he was just, he was in the pain cave and, trying to battle the demons inside of his head, making, not quitting and that sort of thing. And that's the type of stuff that gets me so fired up as a human being. I love hearing those types of stories. Yeah, and that was a fun episode, and hopefully this year there'll be another 90 miler episode starring yours truly. I was planning to do this race with my buddy Paul from the Aptitude Outdoors podcast, but due to it ended up falling on, I think like a week before my wife's due date with new baby Appleton, it was probably not the right time to be deep in the backcountry in a canoe. So sadly, I had to say, okay, maybe next year, but hopefully this coming year, there will be a whole series on the 90 miler, but that will be TBD because it's in September. So it's a ways away and who knows what happens by then. And then Summit Sessions number 39. Are you ready for this one? The 4-year-old 46er with Colt McIlwain. So this was a story about 4-year-old little Thea McIlwain and her dad, Colt. Thea became the youngest Adirondack 46er in history. Yes, she finished at 4 years old. And she started climbing high peaks before she was 3 years old. It is an absolutely mind-blowing story. And then once you listen to the episode, you'll say, oh, so that's how you guys did it. I guess that makes sense. Because so many people were like, there's no way that she climbed these mountains. There's no way that he wasn't carrying her up all of them. Nope, wrong. And once you listen to it and you realize it took them 3 days to climb Big Slide, and you'll see how they did it. She is only 2 or 3 or 4 years old throughout the journey. You'll see how she did it, and it is just so crazy. It's an amazing story. And then at the end of the episode, Colt gave a little interview with little Miss Thea J. So you want to check that out. That was a really great episode, highly regarded by many people. An inspirational story, and also a nice lesson on how to hike with kids. I have young kids. Many people have young kids that listen to this podcast. It's just like, again, it's another great story about how to successfully do it. But that was September 23rd, which brought us to the October sessions. Yes, episode 118, the October sessions. We're back for the 3rd year, starting with the Bigfoot in the Blue Line version 3, face to face. I finally got a Bigfoot encounter in the Adirondack Park that was a type A encounter, face-to-face, seeing with their eyes. This was fun. This was a man named Dave who came on and told us about a camping trip that he had where he was on the railroad tracks and a Bigfoot crossed the tracks out right in front of him. It was awesome. Finally getting to hear a story from somebody who had seen it with their own eyes. And that was in like the Tupper Lake, Long Lake region. So if you're into this whole thing, Bigfoot, if you listen to this podcast, I'm pretty into the subject of Bigfoot. I find it fascinating. But this was a Bigfoot in the Blue Line Part 3, Face to Face, October Sessions, episode number 1 from the 18th, or episode 118, I mean. And then moving on, episode 119, October Sessions, Blue Line Bigfoot and 80K UFOs with Adam and Jake. So Adam and Jake are Adirondack natives. They live down in the Northville area down there. And they have a YouTube channel called Blue Line Bigfoot. And we just riffed. We just talked about their stories. They're from the North Creek area. Sorry, I said Northville. North Creek is what I meant. But they have the YouTube channel that we just talked about stuff. They actually interview people who have weird encounters and weird stories, and like that's part of their YouTube channel. And just like what they're into also. Just they're into these weird subjects of things that are like these. They had their own weird encounters with different things, and that, of course, leads you down a rabbit hole that makes you ask more questions and need to know more about what is going on that we're not seeing because I can't explain what happened. And that leads them down the rabbit hole. But we talked about UFOs in the 80K. We talked about Bigfoot encounters. We talked about just all sorts of just fun things that are just perfect for October. Anyway, so check that out. That's episode 119, October Sessions, Blue Line Bigfoot, and 80K UFOs with Adam and Jake. And then to wrap up the October sessions, we had a Spooky Tales from an Inlet Camp with Miriam Fernez, episode 120, October sessions. This was where a woman named Miriam came on the show and told us about some just weird encounters and just weird things that she's had happen in her camp in Inlet. And if you're not familiar, Inlet is, it's an old town. It is old. It is quiet. It's dark. It's remote. Talk about a great spot for any sort of spooky anything to happen. But that was episode 120. Moving on, as follows my October sessions most years, moving on to an Adirondack hunting episode, because at that point it is the middle of hunting season. Summit Sessions number 40, Tracking Adirondack Bucks with Brendan Quirion. So this was all about Adirondack tracking, which if you're not into hunting, you may have no idea, but in the Northeast, and particularly the ADK in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, old school tracking in the snow is a very popular way of hunting around here. The Adirondacks, people hunt in a tree stand, of course, but it's not as, I would say it's just straight up, it's not as popular as tracking. And it's an older way of hunting, but it's also awesome. It takes you all around the mountains, and you're literally tracking deer, chasing them around the mountain. So I find that to be a really enjoyable way to hunt. It's how I hunt as well. But anyways, Brendan is an absolute savage. He is a very successful hunter, and that was a hunting episode to check out. Moving on now, Winter Hiking 101, Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, the last few episodes that I've put up here. So the reason that I went about doing these episodes is because obviously there was the girl, Emily Sotelo, the Massachusetts girl who died. She froze to death in the White Mountains about like a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago now. And then the following week, there was the kid who almost died from hypothermia on top of Algonquin. There was a rescue that was also in the news. Like it was just evident that, man, there's so many people that are going out into the woods in the winter now, and suddenly it's just like, man, I had this on my list for quite some time to do just like a how-to type of episode. So I started writing this episode, which was going to be just a one little episode. And then as I was going, I was like, wow, there's so much to it. And I understand how people get themselves in bad predicaments. As I started writing these episodes, which turned into a 3-part series, I was like, man, no wonder so many people get themselves in trouble. All of this information that I'm putting together is just kind of, I just know it from being out there doing it. But when you start to break it down, it's like if you're coming from nothing or coming from not having the experience that I have, or the people that I hiked with to learn this from or learn that from, or to talk to about this, or to text this person about this question, I could understand how you get yourself into some bad predicaments, because there really is a lot of information to know before you go out. So I started writing. This was going to be one episode, and then I just realized there's so much information. I'm going to make this a 2-part episode, and then it became a 3-part episode. The first episode is Part 1, Winter Hiking 101, Part 1, Clothing and Equipment, where I go through all the clothes you need to wear and the equipment you'll have. So basically things that are on your body. Episode 2, Winter Hiking 101, Part 2, the essential items and the winter hiking experience. So basically the items that you should have in your backpack along with the winter hiking experience. So I lay out, I create a hiking story just on the show, and to showcase everything I'd been talking about in the first 2 episodes and how they look in real time when you're out there. You're hiking up here, and then, now I got to take layers off. Now I got to put layers back on. Now it's time to put the snowshoes on. Now it's time to stop to cool down. That sort of thing. Just so everything that I have been talking about, you could kind of see how it looks in while you're out there hiking. And then the final episode was Part 3, avalanche safety, hypothermia, frostbite, and more. The end of the Winter Hiking 101 series, and I just go through different things, avalanche safeties, hypothermia, what to look for, how to treat it if it comes on, frostbite, and more. Definitely recommend checking out. If you're a seasoned winter hiker, you probably already know about the first 2 episodes, but that third episode could still be some very nice information for you to know if you're not familiar with what to do in case of any of those emergencies. It could save your life. But those are 3 episodes that I put out, and I'm glad that I did. I mean, I think Christmas Eve into Christmas Day, another gentleman in the White Mountains died. Same thing, just unprepared, snow, and bad situation. So take winter hiking very seriously. It is a serious thing. Winter hiking is not for everybody. It is only for people who will do their homework and people who will get the equipment they need to be successful. Yes, winter hiking is a very expensive hobby. So if you're not willing to spend the money, just wait till the summer. Or you can rent some gear. But in the summertime, you can throw your boots on and a t-shirt and grab your backpack and just head out there. Whereas the winter, it's a very different animal and it should be treated as such. It is not for everyone, only if you're willing to do what you need to do to prepare and plan and have the appropriate equipment. If you're not willing to do those things, I highly recommend just waiting until the summertime to go hiking. Moving forward, then there was the Christmas sessions the night before Christmas in the Adirondack Mountains. This was an episode that I put out 2 years ago, and I just felt like, man, there's been a lot of new listeners in the last couple of years. I'm going to put this episode out again because I loved it. I felt like it was such a fun little Adirondack take on the night before Christmas, and what better time to release it than Christmas Eve, just in time to listen to it because it was the night before Christmas. And for me, here it was in the Adirondack Mountains. Also, there may or may not be a physical book of this coming out at some point in the world. Hint, hint, wink, wink, FYI. But speaking of writing and books and this podcast, there's lots of new stuff in the works. Nothing I want to announce too much now, but there will be some more stuff in that regarding that subject. So also thanks to everyone who has picked up my ebook, How to Climb the High Peaks. I really appreciate it. That is for sale at 46of46.com. If you are looking to start climbing the high peaks, that is the book to start. That is the place to start. It has everything you need to know. The trails, what mountains pair well together, where the trailheads are, what mountains you'll hike from what trailhead, what to look out for, things that you just can't know unless you've been there. So I basically have outlined it all in a 20,000 word book. But anyways, I hope you guys take a listen and pick it up if that's something of interest to you. And there is also a podcast episode about it. But anyways, I think that's going to do it. Man, I have been just yakking for a half hour. But that's it. Basically, we'll call it year 3 in the books here on the 46 of 46 podcast. Again, thank you so much to everybody who's listened to this podcast. I honestly am just shocked that I still do it because I had no intention of continuing the podcast past the 46er journey. It was just a one-off, just kind of fun thing to do. And now look at it, it's kind of like a part of my life. I even have some things that fans of the podcast have sent me literally sitting right next to me on my desk here. These wood carvings with the 46 of 46 logo that someone made, an Adirondack park with a Bigfoot carved into it too that the same person made. Like, it's pretty wild how much this podcast has expanded, and I appreciate everyone listening so much. I have a Mount Marcy hat sitting next to me as well. Just lots of cool stuff, and I'm very grateful for everyone who would deem my podcast worth your time, because there's a lot of shows you could listen to, but I guess there's not a lot of Adirondack shows. Really, there aren't any other than this one, so what can you do? But I really do appreciate it. Hey, do you want to start a podcast about the 80K? Great, I'd love to listen to it. I'll be your first listener. But I really appreciate you all listening. Thanks again. This has been a great year. My episode download count is approaching 350,000, which is just absolutely mind-blowing compared to what I expected to ever. I was going to be stoked if I ever got 1,000 downloads, and look at where it's gone to, so it's pretty awesome. But thank you, everyone, for listening. That's going to do it. I'm going to wrap it up. It's been a great year, 2022. Bye-bye. Hello, 2023. That will do it here on the New Year's sessions on the 46 of 46 podcast. Remember to always leave no trace, do the rock walk, and if you carry it in, carry it out. See you on the other side. 2023, here we go.